Welcome to our African American Quilt Circle Meet the Artist conversation. My name is Andrea Carter, and I am a co-owner of Ngozi Design here in Durham, North Carolina. I'm also a textile artist and a proud member of the African American Quilt Circle of Durham. I'm thrilled to be here today with guest and sartorial griot, Candace Chivis. And we're celebrating our military veteran quilt circle members and their loved ones. Renowned author, researcher, and family historian Alex Haley stated that when a griot dies, it's as if a library has burned to the ground. Information was passed down orally through the generations. Now we are blessed to have the opportunity to help continue and preserve a rich legacy of creativity, of resilience, and service through the art of quilting. Please allow me to read a few highlights about Candace before we get started. Candace Chivis was born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She holds an associate's degree in arts from Grand Rapids Community College, a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Michigan, and a Master of Arts from Western Michigan University. Candace served for most of 1993. She was discharged on December 7, 1993, after being injured in training. She had to wait for a time on her medical discharge. Candace had broken both ankles and damaged her knees. She currently receives disability from the VA for injuries sustained during her training. Candace served as the first female African American county commissioner in Kent County, Michigan, from 2011 to 2017. She started quilting in 2016, moved to Durham, North Carolina in 2018, and joined the African American Quilt Circle of Durham in 2019. She has been a member of the North Carolina Association of Black Storytellers since 2024. Candace began sewing historical garments in 2020 and participated in her first reenactment in 2021. She has participated in living history events in North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, and Texas, sewing her own clothing for each event. As a veteran of the U.S. Army, Candace is active with organizations such as Vote Vets and Common Defense, who sponsored the Veterans Organizing Institute that she attended in 2018. Candace, we thank you certainly for your gifts and talents to our community and to our country. Forgive me if this sounds more like an interrogation than a conversation, but there's lots of important information we'd love for you to share with our audience.
Okay.
So here we go. First question. Who taught you how to sew, how to quilt, or did you teach yourself?
Kind of a mixture of both. My grandmother taught me how to sew when I was a little girl. Mm-hmm. My mom made me take home ec. Remember that class?
Oh my goodness!
When I was in high school, and I had sewed a garment. Mm-hmm. Then I didn't touch a sewing machine or a needle for decades. Mm-hmm. In 2016, my niece was getting ready to go to North Carolina A&T. Every school she attended had the colors of blue and gold, including her high school and both community colleges she attended. So I wanted to make her a blue and gold quilt. And at this point, I'm like, I don't want to just say I'm going to do it and not do it. So I took some classes at a place called Gall Sewing in Wyoming, Michigan. It's about 6 or 7 classes, and I was able to complete the bear track quilt I made for her.
Awesome. Awesome. Yes, we have that in common. I have some Aggie pride in my family. What quilting techniques are your favorites and the most meaningful?
I like patchwork, but I'm getting ready to start an applique that I'm getting from a Barbara Brockman book that's based on an applique that was taken from a family during order number 11. So I tend to do historical quilts and historical reproduction quilts because they help me with my reenacting.
Oh, okay. So, and what is order 11, you said?
Order 11 was in Missouri/Kansas, and it accused the people who were subject to it of being Confederate sympathizers and said, okay, you guys all got to go. Cleared out 4 counties but the Union armies also took all their stuff. How this pattern came to be is one of the little girls, when they ordered them across the border, remembered her mother having a quilt with a certain design on it. The Union Army stole the quilt. She was giving an interview to the Kansas City Star in 1929, accurately described the quilt, passed away like a month and a half later. So that's how the quilt got into like quilting history. And then Barbara Brockman reprinted it in her Butternut and Blue book, which deals a lot with the Kansas-Missouri border war prior to the Civil War and into the Civil War, because Order 11 was into the Civil War. It wasn't before.
I'm curious how you got into historical quilting.
Well, that kind of in conjunction with reenacting, but not really, because I was already doing like reproduction quilts before I started the reenacting, but I just increased it once I started reenacting because it became part of my impression. So, which gave me more inspiration. Okay, we got to make quilts because we're going to show them to people. So,
gotcha. Okay, so have you used sewing and quilting in a way to process or express your service experience?
not really. I did give an entry, kind of a living history, performance art type entry to the Veterans Creative Arts Festival. And I was just at the VA hospital this week to get my COVID and flu shots. And I stopped and took the time to look at it because they put all like the winning entries in this little glass display case. So I stopped and looked at what had won and what other veterans had done. So I'm involved in that regard. And then because I'm involved in like a more progressive veterans organization, a lot of my friends that are veterans are also kind of progressive veterans too. They might be LGBTQ, or they might be Black or Latino, or that type of thing. So
I'm trying to wrap my head around all of this work that you do, all of this art that you do. We don't see a lot of Black women in our circle that are kind of connecting with historical work, which is why I asked that question. And I just think it's so interesting where they say that we don't really think about our history, leaving it to artists like yourself to bring those to life again.
There are people with very strong feelings about reenacting too. Some people feel that it's necessary to accurately represent history, but there are also a strong contingent that really feel that if Black people are reenacting enslaved people, that it could be demeaning or that kind of thing. Obviously, all of my reenactor friends, we all find the work very important, and we find it very important to accurately depict history. We really had that in the recent event I did in Bertie County, because it was highlighting Black and Indigenous participation in the Revolutionary War.
And what are the differences in the different wars? I know you were talking about the Civil War and then the Revolutionary War. What are some of the differences in those two experiences?
From a reenacting standpoint, yes, and from a historical sewing standpoint, the biggest: Revolutionary War equals hand sewn clothing. Civil War, I can use my machine. So that's the biggest. The first sewing machine was invented in 1801, 1803,
early 19th
and it
century.
wasn't really being used for clothing until like 2 or 3 decades later. So there are people that try to argue, oh, I could use my sewing machine on my Regency clothing. No, you really can't. You can look at the date that the sewing machine was invented but the argument that they were using the sewing machine on clothing after it was invented, right after it was invented, that wasn't what was happening. So yeah, you're sewing by hand until well into the 1820s.
Well into it.
So that was the biggest, in that I had to hand sew an entire Revolutionary War wardrobe from scratch. So I had to do 2 petticoats, 2 bed jackets, 2 aprons. I had caps. I had shoes and stockings and all of that. But yeah, that's the biggest one. And because quilting is very interesting around the Civil War, it played a huge role on both sides. Both sides, the women were producing quilts for the soldiers. The women were producing quilts to be auctioned off to raise money. That it was it was a big thing. And you can come at it from the Confederate standpoint or from the Union standpoint, and quilts are still going to play a big role. Not so with the Revolutionary War. People are still hand sewing. We're still pretty much the original 13 colonies. We haven't necessarily started moving massively west and dealing with, say, the Midwestern winter, which is cold, where you would need quilts and that kind of thing. So the quilting, I had to develop a whole new impression for the Revolutionary War because I did not want to hand sew not even a small quilt. I was already hand sewing my clothes. That was enough. But also, quilting does not have the role in the Revolutionary War that it played in the Civil War.
Right.
So, I mean, you can open up Amazon, type in Civil War quilts, and 25 books will come up that you can purchase on Civil War quilts and patterns you used during the Civil War and what they might have been doing in one place or what the women might have been doing in another place. With the Revolutionary War, it just hadn't become as big yet. There was much more applique, so it wasn't as much patchwork. It was much more applique quilting. And then again, it was all done by hand. So I'm like, no, I'm drawing the line there. So yeah, I developed a different impression dealing with herbal medicines.
That is, it's amazing. What an education. Never really thought about quilts in that way. We think about, the quilt circles that happened while we were enslaved, while our ancestors were enslaved, but we never thought about it in terms of, during wartime and those gifts and talents that were used during that time for our soldiers. I did one quilt by hand, the very first one, the shoe fly.
Okay.
And I was determined. My son was just born and I was going to be that mom of the year. But kudos to hand sewing anything at this point. And I also thought that it was kind of cheating to use a machine for quilting.
Okay.
But quilting, I guess, has come a long way. And we're allowed to use machines now. Well, what do you think your work teaches us about patience and perseverance and self-expression?
The hand sewing definitely will calm a person down. And that can be very relaxing. It's harsh when you're looking at like, oh, I've got to sew a whole wardrobe by hand. And it's really harsh. Like I'm still learning. So I've promised a friend I would sew him some pants. I need to learn to sew myself some pants first. And I said, you're going to have to hold up. I got to sew these for me so I know the technique. And again, within reenacting, we have to stay very historically correct. If they weren't using a machine, you can't be using a machine. Same with your uniforms. So for Revolutionary War reenactors, everything is hand sewn, even for the guys as well. So
I'm holding my fingertips as we speak with those needles and hand sewing. What is the legacy or a narrative that you hope to leave behind in your work?
I hope to accurately portray history, and so much, particularly in today's political climate, there's a real effort to try to erase Black history. And when you're reenacting, it's kind of right in your face. Here we are. This is what we did. That's what was so fun about the Bertie County, because it was all about Black and Indigenous participation in the Revolutionary War. Boom, end of subject. And we had wonderful reenactors. We had Black loyalists. We had this artillery group, which was out of Charlotte, that said, oh, we want to work with you guys again because we know your stuff. We had an Indigenous reenactor who was absolutely fantastic. He was so realistic.
Oh, it's absolutely fascinating. Like I said, I never really thought that much about it. One of the things that I enjoy about quilting is being able to tell stories. And I found with so many of our sisters that they use quilting to hold those stories. And some of them are very difficult stories. But I never really thought about reenacting in those pieces of clothing that are sewn, how they're sewn, the respect that's given to historical garments. Is like you said, right there in your face, as opposed to just being a backdrop on a piece of art.
When the quilts really spoke when I was in Texas, I had so many women coming up and telling me about their grandmothers teaching them to quilt, or how they themselves were members of quilt guilds. Or I did have a couple. I want to start quilting. What should I do? Me, find your local quilt guild. In Texas, it really, really spoke to the women. And there were several women that were with the Buffalo Soldiers group that had come over and specifically said, oh, we just love your quilts. Thank you so much for coming down here.
Oh, can't wait to see more of them. I've seen some of your historical garments, but I haven't seen as many of your quilts, so I'm anxious to see some of those. What do you think about creating next?
Ooh, the next thing I'm doing is a masculine hand-sewn outfit, in part because I have to sew my pants for myself so I can sew my pants for my friend. From a 1860s, as we get into the new year, I'm probably going to do a couple of 1860s dresses that I purchased the fabric for and just didn't get finished before I went to Texas. So those will be my 2026 dresses. Revolutionary War, I'm going to do a mock-up for an English gown and then do an English gown in silk. But I'm going to do the mock-up in cotton, and I'm kind of back and forth as to whether I want to get like super cheap cotton from Michaels, or if I want to order more historical cotton and use it as an additional historical garment. So that's where we are with that. But anything that's Revolutionary War has to be hand sewn. So it's like, oh.
I was thinking about that as you were speaking. The fabric. Is it easy to find fabric that's close to the type of fabric that was available?
You have to stay with natural fabrics. So you can't mess around with anything that's polyester. But if you cotton, silk, and wool are your big ones. Silk, linen, and wool are your Revolutionary War ones. Cotton, silk, and wool are your Civil War ones. You've got to keep, before the invention of the cotton gin, there were cotton mixes like Lindsay mixes, but cotton was rather expensive. And it was actually cheaper to do linen. It was more comparably priced with like silk because they were still hand picking out the seeds. Once the cotton gin came in, the seeds were, it was much easier to get it ready to be able to be made into fabric. So that's where you start having a massive amount of cotton garments start coming into use in the 1820s, 1830s. The whole cotton is king. So you've got to keep that in mind and not do anything goofy like make an entire outfit in cotton for your Revolutionary War stuff, because that wouldn't have been realistic. Mixing in or like a cotton cap, you're fine. But anything more than that, it would have been a blend as opposed to just pure cotton.
Okay, so now I'm curious, how much of what you know about reenacting did you learn on your own, and how much did you learn working with others that do that kind of work?
My presentation in Bertie County, I literally started from scratch. I used ChatGPT to kind of flesh it out, which was me just putting into ChatGPT, this is what I'm trying to do. Can you help me get these ideas organized? Because I knew I wanted to do herbal medicine for that. As far as the quilts, all of that's been my research. But I do look at how my fellow reenactors portray things. It's mostly me doing the background research, but then also looking at like what other reenactors are doing at reenactments. So,
well, I don't know. It sounds to me like you got a book in you at some point, full of pictures and full of information that we can certainly leave for future generations. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to share?
I think we've touched it all.
Okay. Well,
So,
thank you again for your service. It's a wonderful conversation, certainly different. And we'll take it from there.
all
Thank you
right,
so much.
excellent.